All right, welcome everybody to the Unchained Bitcoin Retirement and Inheritance webinar series. Today we're going to be going over overview of the Unchained IRA. My name is Justine Harper, I'm the VP of Concierge, and I am joined today by Jeff Andrew, Head of Retirement and Inheritance, and Connor Dolan, Director of Client Solutions. And we are going to be going over our Unchained IRA product, essentially ensuring that you have control of your Bitcoin wealth. So what are we going to cover today though? Let's go ahead and move over to the agenda page, and we're going to talk about a lot of information. Jeff is going to go over why a Bitcoin IRA over a traditional IRA, what is an IRA, an Unchained IRA structure, how our specific product is set up, as well as setting up your Unchained IRA, where Connor's going to take over and go through all of the nuts and bolts of this. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the recent McNulty case, and of course, the best part, go into the live Q&A section where you guys get to decide where the conversation flows. So make sure you're dropping those questions into the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom page or the chat box. And remember, this will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel next week. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Jeff Andrew, who's going to tell us why a Bitcoin IRA. Jeff?
Thank you very much, Justine. I appreciate the intro. So first thing to keep in mind that's very important here in terms of why someone would be interested in a Bitcoin IRA. So there are $35 trillion currently locked in United States retirement accounts. And many of you out there today may have the experience even that the majority of your net worth may be in your retirement account. I mean, before I came to Unchained, I was in private practice, as an attorney and CPA, mostly involved in Bitcoin. But before that, believe it or not, I am old enough that I predate Bitcoin. I was an estate planning lawyer. So I used to, very frequently have a very in-depth look at my clients' net worth. It was necessary in terms of how we would plan for them. And it was not at all unusual for someone to have the vast majority of their net worth nowadays in tax-advantaged retirement accounts. And that's where that $35 trillion figure comes in. Now, if you find yourself in that situation, even if it's not a majority of your net worth, just a nice chunk of change, a lot of people out there want a way to get that into Bitcoin. And historically, that's been very, very challenging. And that's one of the reasons why the Unchained IRA product is so great. And even for those of you out here who don't have the bulk of your net worth in a retirement account, or maybe you don't have a retirement account with a substantial balance at all, if you're just doing, what we sometimes call an annual stack, it can make a lot of sense to maybe do that in a Roth IRA instead of just doing it, outside of the IRA structure altogether. Because as we're going to discuss in a minute, that can mean that all of your future appreciation ends up being tax-free. We go to the next slide. Yeah. So let's start with talking about what is an IRA. So an IRA, it's an acronym, of course, stands for Individual Retirement Account. The short story is it's a tax-advantaged retirement account held by an individual that is not tied to his employer, right? So there's very broadly speaking, two types of tax-advantaged retirement accounts in the U.S. You have your employer-based accounts, which for most people is a 401k. For some other people, if you work for a nonprofit or government employer, it might be a 403b or a 457 or a TSP. Those all fit into the broad category of employer-based retirement accounts. An IRA is the flip side, where that is a retirement account where you are the sole party involved, other than the IRA custodian, which we're going to speak about a little bit later. Your employer is not involved at all. So the nice part about an IRA is you can choose the range of investments that you want to make. You're not limited to a menu that is imposed by your employer. So IRAs allow annual contributions, but often the major funding mechanism for an IRA is going to be when someone leaves his employer. At that point, when you separate from employment, you're allowed to roll your retirement account balance out of your employer plan and into that IRA. And then once you get it into that IRA, that's when you start to get a lot more control over it. So we also need to really talk about how there are two types of IRAs, a traditional IRA and also a Roth IRA. So a traditional IRA is funded with pre-tax dollars. So typically when a traditional IRA is funded by rolling over a non-Roth 401k from work when you either separate from employment or if you're over age 59 and a half, some employers will actually let you roll it over before you separate from employment. So when you make withdrawals from a traditional IRA in retirement, assuming you're over age 59 and a half, those withdrawals are going to be taxed at ordinary income rates since it was funded with pre-tax dollars. The other type of IRA is going to be a Roth IRA. So a Roth IRA is funded post-tax. That means you didn't get a tax deduction up front when you funded it. So these typically are funded either by annual post-tax contributions or a rollover from a Roth 401k, or it could also be funded from what's called a Roth conversion. That is when you take a non-Roth retirement account and you convert it to a Roth IRA. You end up paying some upfront income tax when you do that, but there are tax advantages down the line. Namely that after age 59 and a half, once you make those retirement withdrawals, they are completely and totally free of all taxes, both appreciation, principal, everything, all totally free of income tax. In the chat, someone mentioned a SEP IRA. A SEP IRA is actually a type of traditional IRA. And as we talk about in a minute, we do support those at Unchained. So we can go on to the next slide. So one question that I get most frequently about Bitcoin IRAs is, well, why wouldn't I just liquidate my old retirement account, get the money out of there, and then just buy Bitcoin on my own, right? Well, I mean, that is certainly something you can do, but you're going to end up being able to buy far less Bitcoin than you would have been able to if you had just come over to an Unchained IRA instead. So, and the reason for that is that if you do that, you're going to pay income tax on the full balance in your retirement plan, plus a 10% penalty. That can be a 40% or more reduction in the amount of capital you have up front that you can use to buy Bitcoin. So the nice part about a rollover is it avoids the 10% penalty, it avoids the taxable event, it avoids everything altogether. So I give you a little illustration here. Assume that our conversion rate at the time of this hypothetical is $50,000 to the Bitcoin, and you have a $100,000 retirement account. Well, if you opened up a traditional Unchained IRA, you could buy 2 Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin would be income tax deferred. On the other hand, if you were to liquidate your retirement account, pay all the taxes and penalty, and use the proceeds to buy Bitcoin, depending on your tax bracket, but roughly speaking, you're only going to end up with 1.2 Bitcoin. That's a lot less Bitcoin than 2 Bitcoin. And then also, as you spend that Bitcoin or do anything with it in the future, you're still going to have to pay capital gains tax on all of the appreciation. The other option you have is you could do a Roth conversion. So even if you want to pay some income tax up front, it still doesn't make sense to just liquidate and actually, jump all the way, it still doesn't make sense to liquidate and just buy Bitcoin because you're going to still end up in the hole. The main reason for that is, again, we're going to give you a chart here, same hypothetical. If you had, rolled into a traditional IRA, bought Bitcoin, given those numbers, you end up with 2 Bitcoin. As we saw on the last slide, if you liquidated and purchased Bitcoin, you're going to end up with 1.2 Bitcoin. On the flip side, if you're willing to pay some tax up front, you can do a Roth conversion, buy Bitcoin through a Roth Unchained IRA. You'll end up with 1.4 Bitcoin due to the fact that you avoided all the penalty, even though you had to pay some income taxes. And you're tax deferred for life, unlike the liquidation scenario. So when you spend that Bitcoin in the future in retirement, you don't have to worry about any capital gains tax at all. So now we're going to talk, now that we've gone over the IRA basics, we're going to jump into the actual structure of an Unchained IRA. So the nice part about the Unchained IRA is there are no messy legal complexities to worry about. So a lot of other competing IRA products out there right now are sort of what are called checkbook style IRAs, which our IRA product is not. And the downside to a lot of those checkbook style IRAs is you are totally on your own. All the annual filings, compliance, you have to make sure you get all that stuff right. There's no one there to help you, and you could jeopardize, your IRA Bitcoin investment if you mess it up. The Unchained IRA, with the Unchained IRA, we give you an IRA vault that sits right next to your personal vault and operates mostly in exactly the same way as your personal Unchained IRA vault. So the nice part about that is if you're already an Unchained client, you're not really learning anything new, right? The IRA custodian that we use is Solera National Bank. And the reason that we do this is under the Internal Revenue Code, a licensed financial institution is required to act as custodian of your IRA. There's no way around that. However, as probably a lot of you know in the chat that are listening today, one of our big things our biggest thing at Unchained, I should say, is we want our clients to have that financial self-sovereignty. We want them to have control over their own private keys. So what we've done is we have a legal structure where the IRA custodian holds no private keys. Both you, the custodian, and Unchained, when you open up your Unchained IRA, sign something called a tri-party delegation agreement. And under that agreement, all IRA Bitcoin, I should say, are held in an Unchained vault, and the custodian delegates the vault's private key control. It delegates 2 of the private keys to you and 1 key to Unchained. So this is just like any other Unchained vault, with a 2 of 3 multi-signature vault, 2 signatures required to move the coins. You control a quorum of keys. Unchained holds 1 key as a backup. So now we are going to get into the process of actually setting up your Unchained IRA, what the rollover process looks like, pricing, all this important stuff. And for this part of the presentation, I am going to turn things over to Connor Dolan, who is a director on our client solutions team. Connor is sort of the IRA specialist on our client solutions team. For those of you who choose to sign up for an Unchained IRA, which is hopefully all of you, you may end up working pretty closely with Connor on this process. So he is going to be your guy to really dig into the details here.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jeff. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. I know Jeff and I are really excited to be talking about the Unchained IRA, and we will definitely be getting into all of that today. We'll jump deep into what the rollover process looks like, talk through some of the kind of core details of the product, get into some FAQs, as you can see on the agenda there. And of course, there will be the Q&As at the end. Before we do that, though, I know we probably have a large array of individuals on this call. Some of you are hopefully Unchained clients, I imagine. But I imagine there are also a good swath of you that are not Unchained Capital clients. And before we jump too deep into the IRA specifically, I do want to take a step back and just walk through the Unchained Capital platform more broadly, because ultimately the IRA is really just one small part of what we do at Unchained Capital. So Unchained Capital is a Bitcoin-only financial services company. And our core product, as Jeff was kind of alluding to, our core product and our focus is really on custody. And specifically, Unchained Capital's core focus is empowering individuals to hold their own private keys to their Bitcoin. Now, if you think about Bitcoin more broadly, right, arguably one of its most important attributes, and you could argue where it gets a lot of its value from, is the fact that you can secure it yourself and you don't have to rely on a third party to hold it for you. And you can do this by what's called holding your own private keys. Holding your own keys is kind of akin to holding a bar of gold or a bag of cash, right? It is final settlement. Of course, with Bitcoin, you can do that in a much more scalable and transmissible way as opposed to gold or cash. But most importantly, that power is bestowed upon the individual that's holding the private keys. And we can certainly jump deeper into what that means. You can use these devices. What I'm holding up here is a Trezor. There's many other manufacturers out there that use these devices to help you store your private keys. At a foundational level, what Unchained Capital is focused on doing day in and day out is empowering and teaching individuals how to hold their own private keys. And not only doing that, but we're doing it in a way in which we believe we're offering the superior security solution out there, which is something called multi-signature custody. Multi-signature custody is an address type that it's important to note it's native to the Bitcoin protocol. So once again, I know we have a large amount of different types of clients on this call. Won't get too deep into the technical weeds here, but just to dive a little bit deeper into that. What we are doing is helping clients establish what's called a 2 of 3 multi-signature address or multi-signature custody address. And there's a visual on the screen here that kind of walks you through it. What that means is that we are building these addresses that have 3 private keys associated with them. And in order to access the Bitcoin, someone would need to be able to provide any 2 of those 3 keys. Now, there is a visual on the screen here. You can kind of also think about it if you want a visual picture of like a safety deposit box with 3 unique keyholes and 3 unique keys. And you need any combination of 2 of those 3 keys in order to actually open the safety deposit box. Well, as you can see on the diagram here, we structure these addresses so that we hold 1 private key at Unchained Capital, and you hold 2 keys in the form of these 2 hardware devices and, of course, their seed phrases. If we think through the end result of this structure, first off, we only have 1 key. And of course, you need 2 keys in order to access the Bitcoin. So we actually don't have the ability on our own to access your Bitcoin. All we can do is help you open your safety deposit box. On the flip side, though, you have 2 keys in the form of those 2 hardware devices and their seed phrases. You have unilateral access to the Bitcoin. You're, in fact, the only person in the world that has access to your Bitcoin. Importantly, though, and where we fit in, you're not on an island, right? We're walking you through this process, answering any questions you may have. And most importantly, we've created a security setup where there is now redundancy in your security. So if I did, for whatever reason, if this key were compromised, whether it was lost or stolen, I can still recover the Bitcoin because I have another one of these keys that should be in a separate location. Unchained Capital still has our key. Now we have 2 keys. We have access to the Bitcoin. Now, if you have 2 hardware devices on your own, our platform works with Trezors, ledgers, and cold cards. If you have 2 of those hardware devices, you could go onto our website right now, set up an account, and build your own vault if you knew what you were doing. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, I would definitely point you towards our YouTube channel. A lot of really good resources in terms of how to do it yourself. As you can imagine, though, a majority of our clients actually are not really in that position, and a lot of them don't even have hardware devices. So we have a concierge onboarding service, which is an optional one-time service you can sign up for, where you will get a video consultation with someone from our concierge onboarding team, and we will walk you through the process of setting up these devices, building your first vault, getting you comfortable with our platform. And I imagine Justine will include a link here shortly in that chat where you can sign up directly. You can certainly, if you're more interested in the custody side in terms of how to secure your Bitcoin in a better way, you absolutely can start there and then add on the Unchained IRA on the back end. Ultimately, though, whether you set up the vaults on your own or you go through our concierge onboarding service, the really cool thing is that once you're set up on our platform, then you have access to our broader financial services. So not only do we have vaults that you can set up for your personal Bitcoin, we have vaults that you can set up for a business or a trust. We obviously have the IRA account as well, which we'll certainly get into here shortly, where you're holding real Bitcoin in an IRA while controlling your own keys. We also have Bitcoin-backed loans, and we even have a trading desk where you can buy and sell Bitcoin through us. the broader value of Unchained Capital's platform, outside of just helping people learn how to hold their own keys, is that once you're set up on our platform with the same 2 hardware devices and the same 2 seed phrases, you can manage all of your all of your Bitcoin wealth, rather, all in the same place. Personal Bitcoin, Bitcoin on behalf of a trust, your IRA Bitcoin, all within our platform, but uniquely, you're actually controlling the keys to the Bitcoin. So that's just a broad overview of Unchained Capital more broadly. If you're interested in just learning more, if you go to unchained.com, there's a schedule a consultation button. You can click that link to set up time to speak with a member of our team. Happy to answer any questions that you may have there. So that's an overview of Unchained Capital more broadly. Now we can really get into why we are here today, which is the Unchained IRA, something Jeff and I are incredibly excited to talk to you about. So the Unchained IRA is a new product that we are rolling out. We're really excited to roll it out to the community, and the feedback so far has been amazing. Ultimately, what the Unchained IRA allows for is an opportunity for you to hold real Bitcoin within an IRA, as opposed to like a Bitcoin ETF or a Bitcoin trust like Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, GBTC, as some of you may be familiar with. You can hold real Bitcoin in an IRA and control the private keys to that Bitcoin in that 2 of 3 setup that we were just walking through earlier. Now, on the surface, the Unchained Capital, the Unchained IRA is really a very unique product in terms of being this one-stop shop solution for you to hold actual Bitcoin in an IRA. You're controlling the keys with multi-sig, doing it all at the same place. I mean, for example, we're even helping handle tax reporting in partnership with our IRA custodial partner. The value of the Unchained IRA and the product itself is really unique. But I think a common misconception is that this product is radically different than the IRAs that you're familiar with. And the fact of the matter is they're not. They're really very similar on the surface to an IRA that you'd set up at a legacy finance company like a Schwab or a Fidelity. And for that matter, the rollover process is very much the same. And we get a lot of questions on what does that rollover process look like. And so we thought it might be helpful to just walk through that with you on the call today. So what I have is kind of a visual on the screen here. This shows you really the money in motion and the rollover process. Ultimately, if you are interested in moving forward with the IRA onboarding, the first step is to complete the IRA order form. Once again, I imagine Justine will include a link here on the chat, and I imagine it'll be in the notes as well. You can also just access it by going to unchained.com/Bitcoin-IRA. Ultimately, you fill out the order form. Within that order form, you can add on the Concierge onboarding service. So you can start on the custody side if you'd like, or if you want help getting set up on our platform and you're interested in the IRA, you can do it all at once through that IRA order form. Once you process your order form, the next step will be to set up an Unchained Capital profile and then an IRA account and an IRA vault within that Unchained Capital profile. As Jeff mentioned, if you're already a client, you're already set up on our platform, it's really as easy as adding an additional account within your Unchained profile, still using the same 2 hardware devices if you choose to. Simultaneously, while we're setting up that IRA account at Unchained Capital, we're also establishing a new IRA account for you at Solera National Bank, who is our IRA custodial partner. At the end of that process, you will have a new IRA account set up at Solera National Bank and an Unchained Capital account and vault associated with that Solera account. That process maybe takes a week to 2 weeks. At the point that you're set up and those 2 accounts are set up, now we're ready to accept your funds. You can initiate a transfer request. You can do that by just uploading a transfer request form to Solera's website. Solera will actually reach out to your custodian on your behalf and give them the instructions to send over the funds. Now, of course, this is where we say that how long it takes your custodian to actually send those funds over is completely contingent upon them. As you can imagine, we don't have any control of that. But once they do send the funds over and they land at Solera's side, it'll take 1 to 2 business days for those funds to settle. And then the following business day, our trading desk will automatically convert those tax-advantaged US dollars into Bitcoin and deposit it into your vault. You'll get a trade summary notifying you that the purchase has been made. And of course, this is just an overview of the process. We will walk you through, once you sign up for that order form, we're going to provide instructions and walk you through every step of the way here. So just kind of looking at the overview of the rollover process, although the end product, the end result of having Bitcoin in this IRA where you're controlling the keys is very unique, you can see that the rollover process is really pretty straightforward. You're liquidating it, you're setting up a new IRA account, liquidating the funds at the current custodian, sending them over to Solera. We're just reinvesting them and buying Bitcoin instead of Apple stock or the S&P 500, whatever it may be. So to dive into just an overview of some of the main details with the Unchained IRA, from an availability standpoint, this is available in all 50 states. And even if you're actually in, international, we have worked with some expats before. If you have an IRA or a 401k that you earned while in the United States, we may still be able to work with you as well. In terms of what you can set up with Unchained Capital, we support traditional, Roth, SEP, and inherited IRAs. From a pricing perspective, every Unchained IRA that you set up with us will have a $995 setup fee and $250 annual maintenance fee. That annual maintenance fee starting in year 2, so after 12 months of setting up the account. Those fees are applicable for every IRA you set up with Unchained. So if you set up, a lot of clients are setting up a traditional and a Roth with us, that would be 2 sets of setup fees and maintenance fees. Now, alternatively, we do have some clients that have, multiple Roth IRAs with different providers. Of course, this is where I say we can't give any sort of tax advice. I'm not a tax professional, and we certainly encourage you to reach out to your tax professional for all things related to IRAs and rollovers and contributions. But ultimately, you can consolidate those IRAs. So you would just set up one Unchained Roth IRA with a Roth IRA with Unchained Capital, and you can consolidate all of those Roths into the same account. The only other fee to really be mindful of here is our 0.5% trading fee. So any Bitcoin that is converted through our trading desk, there is a 0.5% trading fee. So that's true for both USD rollovers and USD annual contributions. Something important to note here, we do have a minimum conversion through our trading desk of $6,000, which means that every rollover that you complete or contribution that you complete needs to be a minimum of $6,000. We can certainly dive into that a little bit more in the Q&A as well. And then one last point on the Unchained IRA, as I mentioned before, tax reporting is handled by Unchained in partnership with Solera National Bank. So we'll handle the fair market value reporting. Solera will provide you a 1099 form every January if applicable. And then one last thing I wanted to run through was just some frequently asked questions that we get a lot, and starting with a really important one, because we get this all the time, and I totally understand where people are coming from when they ask this question. But can I make Bitcoin contributions to my IRA? And the answer is no. That's not an Unchained rule. That is an IRS. That's an IRS rule per IRS guidelines. There's no way to make a Bitcoin contribution to an IRA. So if you're making a contribution to the Unchained IRA, it will need to be in US dollars. Going on to the second one, do I have to roll over the full amount of my IRA or 401k? So absolutely not. At Unchained, we accept partial rollovers. Of course, once again, it needs to be that minimum of $6,000, but you can absolutely process as many partial rollovers into the Unchained IRA as you'd like. And then moving on to that third question, taking it a step further, you're not even required to complete a rollover. A lot of people think that that's the only way to set up this type of account. You are absolutely free to set up brand new Unchained IRA with us and just immediately start making annual contributions, even if you don't have an IRA or an old 401k to roll over. And then finally, can I use my current hardware devices for my Unchained IRA? And the answer is yes. As I was walking through earlier, really the design of our platform is to allow you to maintain that same security solution for all of your Bitcoin wealth. And you are absolutely welcome to use those same 2 hardware devices and seed phrases for your IRA vault as well. Importantly, though, you have complete flexibility. So we give you the option if you want to add additional keys, if you want to have 2 sets of, 2 unique sets of keys just for your IRA, you're certainly welcome to set that up as well. It's completely your call. So ultimately, if you are interested in learning more about the Unchained IRA, you can also set up time to speak directly with me. Obviously, we'll jump into the Q&A here and keep the conversation going, but I'll include a link as well where you can book time directly on our calendar to speak specifically on the IRA stuff. But of course, we can also speak more broadly about our platform. With that, that's the end of my section here. I think next we're going to jump into a bit of the competitive landscape and some of the other Bitcoin IRA options out there. And for that, I'll pass it back to the man who's probably been in the space longer than almost anyone else. So Jeff, I'll pass it back to you. And once again, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you very much, Connor. I appreciate that. Yeah, just one point of clarification before we get into the competitive landscape here. You can't make annual contributions in Bitcoin. I saw a ton of people as soon as that came up asking if they could do in-kind contributions from another Bitcoin IRA. That we do allow so long as you're sending your old Bitcoin IRA provider allows it. So if your old Bitcoin IRA provider doesn't allow it, that we have no control over. If your old Bitcoin IRA provider does allow it, we can accept it. So with that, we can jump to the next slide and start to talk about some competitive overview stuff here. So yeah, I mean, this gives you kind of an idea of how the Unchained IRA lines up with a couple of the more popular other providers that you see out there today, namely Choice, iTrust Capital, and Bitcoin IRA. Right. So, when we're talking about Choice, really, we're talking about two separate products. Choice has a custodial, version where you have no control over your private keys. And then they also have another version in partnership with Casa, which is more similar to the Unchained product where you have some level of control over your private keys. So with regard to the custodial version, I mean, you're paying an annual fee for storage, which in the long run, if you check out those numbers at the bottom there, is going to make things more expensive for you. And it has all the same drawbacks of not having control over your own private keys, right? The other version there is obviously the version where you do have control over your private keys. Where we're really competitive there is, number one, our trading fees is significantly lower. It's half of what Choice's is. And secondly, with the Choice product where you have some level of key control, you have to pay for a Casa membership starting in year 2 on top of whatever you're paying Choice. Whereas with Unchained, it's all one nice vertically integrated product that's all included in our $250 annual fee. iTrust and Bitcoin IRA are very, very different products, right? Those are products that do not offer any level of control over private keys at all. Bitcoin IRA doesn't publicize their fees. You have to call them for a quote based on how much you're bringing over. I can tell you I have never heard of a situation where Bitcoin IRA is not significantly more expensive than we are. iTrust, I always tell people the truth. iTrust can definitely be less expensive than us depending on how much you're bringing over, right? Particularly for smaller IRAs. However, iTrust has all the same drawbacks of just holding a Bitcoin ETF in your brokerage account. I mean, you don't have any control over your private keys. So if you're not interested in control over private keys, I mean, like I said, I mean, there's not a big advantage there over the ETF in your brokerage account. So we really think that when you look at holistically all the different factors, no one's really offering what we're offering. And that we're providing a tremendous value to our clients. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, one thing I really want to talk about right now too, and I already happen to notice a bunch of people in the chat talking about it, are how Bitcoin IRAs work after the McNulty case. So for those of you who aren't aware, a couple months ago, the tax court handed down a ruling, the name of the case was McNulty, that was honestly very poorly reasoned, but in the interest of conservatism, we want to try and comply with the requirements that the tax court sort of laid out for a self-directed IRA, not running into any tax trouble, for lack of a better term. So the McNulty case, what it did in a nutshell, and we're not going to get too deep into the weeds, because this is not a McNulty webinar, it's more of a broader IRA webinar. We may do a more McNulty focused webinar in the future. But the bottom line is the tax court laid out some novel theories about how involved the IRA custodian has to be in day-to-day monitoring and operation of a self-directed IRA. So up till now, most IRAs that allowed you to buy Bitcoin and offered you some level of control over your keys were checkbook style IRAs. They involved your IRA owning either an LLC or a trust, and all the Bitcoin in turn actually not being held by your IRA, but being held by that underlying LLC or trust. And as a result of that setup, the IRA custodian essentially had no vision or idea what you were doing within that legal entity. And the tax court in McNulty did not like that very much for a variety of reasons. They created a concept known as constructive receipt based on the fact that there was this sort of unfettered access. So the good news is, unlike other products out there today, which allow you, key control while holding Bitcoin in an IRA, an Unchained IRA is not a checkbook IRA. There is no LLC or trust involved. And while you do have control over the private keys, the underlying Bitcoin must always stay within that one singular vault, or there can actually be multiple vaults, but all within one IRA account at Unchained. And the IRA custodian has total eyes over that vault. In other words, they know the public keys, the addresses, the wallet configuration file, all that sort of stuff. So they have full eyes on transactions going in and out of that vault. That was the key factor in the McNulty case that created constructive receipt, right? It was not having eyes on that sort of stuff. In the Unchained setup, the custodian does have eyes on all of those things. So while you do have the ability to use your private keys at any time to move your Bitcoin out of your IRA vault, the custodian would become aware of that, and obviously that would be reported as an IRA distribution. And that's the key here, because all IRAs have a situation where most modern IRAs have a situation where you can just use your password, log in, and withdraw your funds whenever you want. So having a quorum of, private keys in this situation is not really any different from a legacy financial institution IRA where you could withdraw at any time. Just like a legacy financial institution, when that withdrawal happens, the custodian is aware of it and it's properly reported to the IRS. So as a result, we think that we're really bridging the gap here where we're able to comply with these new requirements that were laid out in the McNulty case while still giving you some control over your private keys. Because again, while the custodian doesn't have any private keys, they are able to see those transactions because they have access to the public keys as well as the wallet configuration. So with that, I think we're ready to kind of jump into our Q&A section. I think we got a lot of questions, so we'll try and get through
a lot of questions. I know you went in a little bit into the in-kind IRA conversation. There's a lot of questions about that, so just wanted to clarify on that specifically, whether you or whether you or Connor could perhaps go through when you have an in-kind IRA, you already have a Bitcoin IRA set up. What does the process look like? How does this work? How do you not have to sell that Bitcoin to move it over to your new one? Can we just talk?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, and Connor, you can add any color just from being the client-facing guy on the ground dealing with these. So basically, what happens is you sign an authorization form on our end that ends up going through our custodian to the other custodian, whether that's Bitcoin IRA or which uses Horizon Trust, or whether that's iTrust, whoever that custodian may be. They receive that request. In that request is provided an address that is associated to your Unchained IRA vault. So essentially, when they receive that request, assuming that it's a provider that will allow outbound in-kind transfers, what they're going to do is they're simply just going to send all of the Bitcoin in that custodial IRA over to that address that we've provided. And then that's basically it. I mean, that's the end of the situation. If it's a checkbook IRA thing that you have with a third party where they don't have the keys to actually be able to send the Bitcoin, when we send that request, typically what they're going to do is you'll get a copy of that address as well, and you'll actually be the one that is sending the coins into the Unchained vault. Your old custodian may require proof from you that the coins have been sent. That's really up to their internal policy, but that's the basics of how that would work.
Yeah, Justine, it looks like you're muted there. Yep. Perfect.
Oh, good. Thank you. One big question that we have is, I think this was Gregory asking for some more information here. I know we covered it on the process chart, Connor, but maybe you could dig in just a little bit more. So let's say you sign up for the Unchained IRA, everything's set up. Now we're taking the asset from the traditional IRA, and now you have cash sitting in an account, and Bitcoin needs to be purchased to put into the Bitcoin vault. Who's doing that Bitcoin purchase? Mary had a follow-up question about how often, like how quickly does that work? Price volatility, is that part of the issue? Is there any issue with that? What's the turnaround time? And so maybe you could kind of touch on that process specifically of what that looks like and how that works, because we did have a few questions on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fair question, certainly. So the actual Bitcoin process, once the transfer is initiated, basically you've done everything that you've needed to do. There aren't any additional steps you need to take. The actual conversion of that Bitcoin is going to be done basically automatically by our trading team on a regular schedule. So once again, just as a reminder, first step is to get those accounts set up and send the US dollars over to Solera. It'll take a couple of business days for those funds to actually settle. We're still dealing with the legacy financial system here. And then once those funds settle, the following business day, Unchained Capital's trading team, all of this Bitcoin is being purchased through our OTC desk, through our trading desk. The following business day, first thing in the morning, our trading team will make a purchase for those funds. So that when I say the process is automated, it's on a regular schedule. There isn't the ability to actually time the Bitcoin purchase itself from a scalability and a functionality standpoint. It's just not something that we can support at this time. So ultimately, from a timing perspective, because understandably there's concerns about being out of the market, once you set up those two accounts and you get to the point where we're ready to accept the funds, you have the option of initiating the transfer request immediately, but you don't have to. At any point in the future, you can initiate the transfer request. So where you get the ability to kind of time everything is from deciding when you want to initiate that transfer request. Once again, once you start that process, there's nothing else that's really needed from your end. You do that by uploading a transfer request form to Solera. Solera will send that to your current custodian. And then it's really the longest wait time is just waiting for your current custodian to actually process that request and send the funds over to Solera. It's really hard to give like an expectation from a timing standpoint, because once again, so much is contingent on how quickly the custodian is to act, and also a little bit on you to make sure that those funds are liquidated before that transfer request is placed. But ultimately, on average, we've seen clients be actually out of the market in terms of when they sell at their custodian to when it's repurchased into Bitcoin, somewhere maybe in the 7 to 10 day range. Hope that helps, but certainly feel free to keep the questions going if we need to dig deeper into that. Just two questions since I have the mic and there's so many in here. So Unchained Capital is Bitcoin only. That's true for us as a company. That's also true for the Unchained IRA. So if you're moving into the Unchained IRA, anything that moves into the IRA is Bitcoin only. Now, once again, we do allow for partial rollover. So if you have a $100,000 IRA at Fidelity, there's nothing saying that you have to roll over all $100,000. You could roll over $50,000 or technically as little as $6,000 into the Unchained IRA. Anything that's sent over, though, is going to be converted into Bitcoin. And then one point of clarification on the contributions, because I know that can be kind of a little bit of a unique situation. So once again, the minimum conversion through our trading desk is $6,000. And that's true for both rollovers and contributions. So if you're doing a rollover, well, whether it's a full rollover or a partial rollover, it needs to be $6,000. If you're doing an annual contribution, it also needs to be $6,000. That is done at the same time. The nuance there is ultimately at this point, you can't like DCA into the Unchained IRA. You can't do like $100 a week or $500 a month. It's a lump sum contribution of at least $6,000. Maybe I can pass it over to Jeff for any additional color there, or I'll leave it to you.
No, I think you pretty much covered it. Yeah, I mean it's a buy and hold product. We're not designed for frequent traders. And at this time we're not offering DCAing as an option for that sort of thing. At some point in the future, perhaps on the DCA side, but ultimately with the thing with an IRA is ultimately you're holding these coins for such a long period of time that the value in doing that is somewhat questionable. So either way, right now, not something we're able to support.
Perfect. And one of the biggest questions I've seen, quite a few here, and I'm going to lump some of you guys together, but many individuals are perhaps have a KeyKeeper IRA currently, and they've worked with you, Jeff, previously, and they're curious, one, what do they do if they want an Unchained IRA? What does that look like? What's the benefit? What's going to be different? And then there was a follow-up question of if they do switch, at what point do they then close off their LLC or their trust that they've created? So maybe somebody can shed some light on that. I assume that question is pretty in-depth, so maybe the two of you can weigh in there.
Yeah, so actually we have a migration process that just began this week for people that have existing Solera checkbook IRAs that want to transition over to the Unchained product and get out of having a checkbook IRA. If you're interested in doing that, all you need to do is sign up and you'll be guided through that process essentially step by step. All the Bitcoin is going to end up, the short story is at the very beginning of the process, you're going to have to convert any US dollars that are left into Bitcoin using the existing exchange account that you had set up for your checkbook IRA. And then all those coins are eventually going to have to get cleaned out and moved into the Unchained vault. That's the short story. If you have an LLC involved, most people have trusts. If you have a trust, there's not really any dissolution that needs to happen since it's not created by estate filing. If you have an LLC, you actually dissolve that up front because you have to get those LLC fees, the dissolution fee paid to the state at the very beginning of the process. And again, we have a guidance that we give our clients on how to move through that whole process.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on to that is, as you can tell, so this is just for Vandrew LLC, Solera IRA clients. What I would say there's kind of a unique process for clients in that position. The easiest thing to probably do is just email me at connor@unchained.com, and I'll help walk you through kind of your options and next steps.
Perfect. Question about max contribution limits to Bitcoin IRAs for both. Are they the same for both traditional and Roth? And can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean the IRA contribution limits are set by the IRS, the maximum, so it changes every year. We can't unfortunately really give you tax advice because we're not your attorney or your CPA, but we follow whatever the IRS limitation is in a year, which currently for most people is $6,000.
There was a few questions just trying to clarify on if they want to set up an Unchained IRA, they need the hardware, they want to go through Concierge. I know we dropped a link in for the IRA fees and options where you can add Concierge in. But Connor, maybe you can touch on what that would look like. What comes with the Concierge service? Of course, I could jump in as well. But if they wanted hardware devices, if they wanted to do that along with their IRA, if they wanted assistance, what is the pricing structure of that, and how would they go about doing so?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Justine. So just as a reminder, the Unchained IRA itself, $995 for a setup fee. That is for the cost of actually setting up the Unchained IRA. That is completely separate from our Concierge onboarding service, which is a service that you can sign up for, whether you're an IRA client or whether you're not an IRA client. Justine helps lead our Concierge onboarding team. And if you're lucky enough, you might get booked with her and get onboarded by Justine herself. Ultimately, the way to do that in conjunction with the Unchained IRA is when you're filling out that order form, you will have the option of just the standard Unchained IRA onboarding for $995, or you can do the Unchained IRA with Concierge onboarding. The Concierge onboarding service is a 60-minute video call where we will walk you through every step of the process. That call is $250. Now, additionally, you can order hardware devices through us for $200 per device. And we send out these Trezor Model Ts. We're basically providing them to you at cost. You don't have to order devices through us, though. We give you the option because some clients don't have hardware devices. Our platform, once again, works with Trezors, ledgers, and cold cards, and you are certainly welcome to bring your own devices to that call. We just need you to have 2 hardware devices, any combination of Trezor, ledger, and cold card. But go back and answer your question, Justine. When you're filling out the IRA order form, you can tack on the Concierge onboarding service for an additional $250. And then you can tack on hardware devices through us as well for an additional $200 per device.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. All right. So there was one question here that just asked, and I know Connor touched on this a little bit, but they're pretty much asking, so are you saying that I can have a Unchained IRA set up with one account and a vault for that IRA, and then you can have a completely separate personal vault for your additional savings and use the same devices? So if you wanted to just clarify on that a little bit, Connor, there was a follow-up question there just to make sure they heard you correctly.
So the short answer is yes, absolutely. And that's really what our platform is designed for, not just your IRA and your personal vault, but if you have a business or a trust, you could set up a vault as well there. We have Bitcoin-backed loans that may not be relevant for you today, but could be relevant for you at some point in the future. From a visual, a mental image perspective, I kind of like to think about it like an online bank, right? You may have one username and password, but you log in and maybe you have a checking account, a savings account, and a business account with the bank, all these different accounts, but all roll up into that same username. Same kind of idea here. You have one master Unchained Capital profile, and then you can have multiple different accounts, a personal account with a personal vault, IRA account with an IRA vault, all of this, same kind of structure, with one major difference being you're actually custodying and controlling the keys yourself.
Yeah, and I just to add one point to that, in case anyone had a technical question about the device thing. A big part, the reason why you can use the same hardware devices for both your personal vault and your IRA vault is, despite using the same devices, those vaults are cryptographically distinct. They're totally separate wallets. And the way that's accomplished is through using different derivation schemes on the hardware device. We won't be able to get into the technical side of how those derivation schemes work, on this call, because we won't have the time. But we do have an article, I know, on the Unchained, either the blog or the knowledge base, I forget which, that goes into how derivation schemes work. And that is something that, we help you through setting the derivation scheme as part of your onboarding process.
Justine, if I can jump in with one additional question that I saw here, that's I get this question a lot as well. So in regards to how these fees are paid for, so the $995 setup fee and the $250 maintenance fee, as well as any additional add-on costs like the Concierge onboarding service or the hardware devices, that is all paid from your personal bank account, your personal funds. Only the trading fee is taken from the IRA funds themselves, and that's kind of a non-negotiable. The IRA trading fee has to be taken from the IRA funds. The setup fee, the additional cost of the concierge, that's all taken from personal bank account information.
Yeah, thank you for that. There are so many questions. And if we don't get to yours today, I'm trying to sort of do general questions that encompass a lot of the different questions. But if we don't get to them, of course, you can email Connor at unchained.com. We do have the free consultation as well that I've dropped into the chat a couple of times now, but that is a free call to jump on with an expert and ask these specific questions about your specific case, because there are some questions that are very specific, and sometimes it just means you need to get on the phone with somebody and ask something direct for your specific case. Now, one of the questions that I do see coming up often here is talking about inheriting an IRA. So how do we handle IRAs that have been inherited, and what does that look like? That may be a question for Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, we offer inherited IRAs as a specific account type, just like a brokerage would. So if you have an IRA that you inherited from someone else, currently held at another IRA provider, we can set up an inherited IRA for you. The funds will be directly transferred over. The only way the initial setup process differs on the inherited IRAs is, in addition to needing like your name, your social security number, your birth date, we're also required to get the decedent's name, the decedent's social security number, the decedent's birth date, the decedent's death date, just some basic information like that. But otherwise, yeah, we can get it set up for you. It's not all that different from a normal IRA other than that.
Perfect. So one of the questions that I saw come up in chat, and I think Gregory has asked it a couple times, I just want to address it. Who would like to make the case of why holding the keys to your Bitcoin IRA is important versus some of the other products that don't allow you to hold your keys? He's stating that there are some fees associated with that, so sell him on it. Why is holding the keys to your wealth important? Who wants to take that one?
Connor's on Client Solutions, and he probably, his job is basically explaining people the answer to that question. So I'll let him take that one.
That's a lot of pressure coming from the guy who's been in the space a good bit now. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, as I'm looking at the chat here as well. This phrase of "not your keys, not your coins," or "not your keys, not your cheese," which is one of my personal favorites. Ultimately, a lot of this comes back to some of the broader values and principles of Bitcoin more broadly. And this idea of being a self-sovereign individual, Bitcoin really gives us as individuals the ability to custody our personal wealth in a way that we never have before. And that all goes back to, as I was saying in the beginning, the core mission of Unchained Capital. We believe that holding your own keys is a vital aspect of being a long-term Bitcoin holder. And, we can, with 60 seconds left here, we can go into all these different reasons about, the downsides of holding your Bitcoin on an exchange. And the fact of the matter is, it all comes back to it's a Bitcoin IOU. If they're holding the keys at any point, the exchange can decide what they want to do with your Bitcoin. They can create arbitrary withdrawal maximums and say, you can only take out $25,000 per week from your account. They can increase the withdrawal fees, or increase the period it takes before you can actually withdraw your Bitcoin. Ultimately, it all comes back to this idea of not your keys, not your coins. If you're not holding your own keys at any point, someone could freeze your account for suspicious activity, for example. It's not necessarily that we expect that this is going to happen. We're not trying to fearmonger, but the fact of the matter is Bitcoin gives you this opportunity to custody your wealth in a way that as humans, we've never had the opportunity to do so before. And if you don't take that opportunity, to custody your own keys, you're arguably missing out on Bitcoin's most important, if not one of its most important attributes. So we believe that value and that principle applies across the board, whether you're looking at your personal Bitcoin or Bitcoin for an IRA or for a trust or anything in between.
Yeah, and just one tiny thing I'd add very quickly, because I know we're out of time, is one aspect of that people don't often think about is the company could go under, right? And if the company goes under, your Bitcoin's not insured typically, or if it is, only a fraction of it is insured. And at that point, you're just an unsecured creditor. So if the company goes insolvent because they're losing money, that doesn't mean that your Bitcoin is safe. You're an unsecured creditor in line with everybody else, potentially at that point. So, just be careful about that sort of thing. That's my only point.
I think that was a great selling point of why to hold your keys. We're all super passionate about it. That's why we do what we do, right? At Unchained Capital, the foundation is built on helping individuals hold the keys to their wealth. So I think that was a great way to end this webinar. We are at the hour. I know there were some questions that were not answered. Apologies that we didn't have time to get through all of those. This will be recorded and you can review back on it on our YouTube channel, but maybe it was a question that was answered during the slideshow that you could review back to. Otherwise, I did drop again that free consultation link in the chat. Schedule that. It's a 30-minute call for you to ask all these questions with Connor and other individuals just like him. So make sure you take advantage of that. Otherwise, I just want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Connor and Jeff for being here. This is your Unchained Capital Retirement and Inheritance webinar series covering the overview of the Unchained IRA. We will catch you guys next time and enjoy the rest of your week.